Hey, how's it going, guys? I want to do a follow-up video with this Marshall JTM50 from 1967. If you have not seen the first video on this, I'm going to leave a card up here in the upper right-hand corner so you can go check that out first. I highly encourage you to do so. There was a valid criticism in one of the comments. Actually, there was a nice comment that somebody tried to leave and said, you know, that I had done like a master class on oscilloscope, but I never presented it as that, and I agree that it absolutely is not a master class on oscilloscope use, and I didn't present it as such. I was just basically using the oscilloscope because I was too lazy to move my speaker load from way over there that I normally use on videos, and I decided just, yeah, I'll use the scope this time because you know, the guy was right. I never use the scope on the channel, and usually that's for reasons that have to do more with my personal preference than anything. But I wanted to address the criticism because he's right. The guy came in and he said, you know, this isn't a master class at all. He didn't teach us how to do RMS output, how to calculate that. He didn't show us what the distortion looked like after the amp was biased properly and all that good stuff. And he did make a comment that the crossover distortion sounded awful or whatever, and I don't agree with that necessarily, but everybody's got their opinion on that sort of thing. However, I did want to show you what the amp actually looks like on oscilloscope in the state that I was playing it in. So if you watch the end of that last video, you'll hear the tone that I was getting out of the amp. Now I've got the bass, I know it's hard to see because there's no knob here, but I've got the bass dialed all the way down. So for those of you who were criticizing the amp for being thin, that was probably my fault because I didn't really capture the amp, I don't think, in the way that it sounded in the room. It sounded fantastic in the room, just really crunchy, really driving, tight mids. All the stuff that you like to hear out of a Marshall in the room, and it was probably my fault for not getting the right combination of microphones and setup in the room to try to capture that properly. I'm really bad at that, and I admit that. But I wanted to show you visually what the amp looks like when it is pumping out the way that it was at the end of that last video. So I haven't changed the settings here. I have the inputs jumpered, as you can see right here. So I'm going into input 1. I'm coming out of input 1. I'm using a jumper cable to jumper over to input 2. So I'm actually running the first, these channels in parallel. Channel 2 loudness is set. Let's see, let's set that about where it was. So you can see that already over there and see what it looks like just by itself. Now, if I start dialing in the first channel as well, look at what this does. It actually is dialing in on top of the other signal, and you can see what the distortion wave actually looks like. Okay? So here, let's back off channel 1 again. So let's go with just one channel. So there's what one channel of distortion looks like. And that's all the way up, channel 2, all the way up. Okay? So that's one channel. Now if I start dialing in the other channel on top of that, you'll notice, here I'm coming up, you'll notice the top of the wave starts to get clipped off, and you're going to notice a spike right up here. I know it's jumping around a little bit, but that's just because I don't think I'm getting the best of connections, but on the probes necessarily, and also it's a CRT. You got to take it with a grain of salt, in other words. So I'm going to dial it up some. You can see how this is squaring off really nicely up here at the top. How we've got all this asymmetrical stuff going on too. How from this line up and this line down, you're getting it's slightly asymmetrical. You're also getting this asymmetrical crossover distortion right here in the middle. And you can see this start to get more pronounced as I turn that up. But I'm turning it back down now on channel 1. And once again, this is all just one channel now. So we are getting some clipping at the top of the wave. We got this crossover distortion. I can turn channel 2 down. Now right there, we've got just a hint of crossover distortion. The tops are pretty well not squared off at all. And the distortion sort of kicks in on both at about the same time. So we start getting crossover distortion or notch distortion here in the center about the same time we start to get squared off up here as well. And this is really what you want to see on these classic amps like this. You see the way that that's squaring off. Let's turn that down just a hair. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is calculate the RMS output of this amplifier, okay? Then that was the other thing that was mentioned that I did not do. So the way to calculate this, first of all, what you want to know is I have the 10x selected on my probe. So that means that anything I get here on the oscilloscope is going to be multiplied by 10 times. So each one of these segments, you'll see the wave will go 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, etc. Down here, I have it set to 1 volt per division. So really what that's going to mean is 10 volts per division because I've got the probe set at 10 times. So it's going to be 10, 20, 30. And you'll see that's about correct for what we're getting here. And this is cranked. So we get 10, 20, about 30 at the peak watts. Okay, so if we want to do the calculation for RMS output, we can do that. Here's how we calculate that. We take our peak voltage, and we've already determined it's a little over actually 30 volts, but we'll just say it's roughly 30 volts, 32 volts or so. We'll say 32. We'll say 32 squared over R, and the R that we're using is 8 ohms, and that's going to be multiplied by 0.707, and we're doing the 707 as a control for root mean square. And this is also why when we bias amplifiers, it's related to the same reason we multiply. We take the bias, the full plate dissipation, only 70% of that, because we want to leave room for the amp, for the peaks, in other words. Okay, so if we calculate that out right there, I'm going to, like I said, about 32. I think it's about 32 is what we were getting in reality. And this is peak. This is cranked all the way up. This isn't before distortion or anything like that. So this is going to be kind of a skewed vision of reality. I mean, this is what it can get on its best day, cranked all the way up. So you have to keep that much in mind. Let's go ahead and let's put the amp in standby. Let it rest for just a second while we do this. So if we do the calculation, we could say 32 squared is 1024, okay? Divided by 8, that's 128 times 0.707, all right? Times 0.707. That's 90.4 watts. And that, like I said, that's not before distortion. That is actually out RMS. So that's a lot. And I don't even know, did I do that calculation correctly? It looks correct on paper, and for what I just did, it looks correct. And that's the first time I've tried to calculate it. It seems really high because it's supposed to be a 50 watt amplifier. And actually, I'll tell you what we can do. If you want to do it before distortion, we'll see what the wattage is before distortion. And that'll give us actually a more accurate, really, vision of what the amp actually is. Okay, so right about there is the before distortion. So we've got 10, about 20. Okay, so 20 squared divided by 8 ohms is 50, and we need to do 50, and we need to do the root mean square on that, so that's times 0.707, or you could even just do 70% if you want. So about 35.35 watts is the actual RMS output before distortion of this amplifier. So, you know, for those of you who are curious, and you know, and I don't think the guy who was criticizing me was hating or anything. I think it was a valid criticism. This was not, my last video was not meant to be a master class in anything, really. It was just meant to show off the amp more than anything. And the oscilloscope use was basically just because I was lazy. I was too lazy to bring my speaker that I usually use over here to the bench. So, but I mean, if you guys prefer this method of troubleshooting and stuff like that, I have no problem with doing it this way, and, you know, trying to show more oscilloscope use. You know, let me know in the comments if this is something that you prefer. I just think that the videos work better and are more entertaining if you can actually hear the amp, if you can hear what it's doing. It's more of an immediate sensation than trying to look at a scope and determine what something is doing. So I've just always done it this way, and you know, again, it's partly out of laziness, you know, partly just kind of stuck in my ways. It's not that I'm unwilling to learn new things or to show you new things or to, you know, bust out the scope. I've had this scope for a long time. It's just been sitting on either the floor or up on my shelf, you know, beside my station, and I just don't use it. But if that's something you guys would like to see more, let me know down in the comments. But I just wanted to do this as a follow-up video, you know, for the critics. And like I said, I'm not averse to criticism whatsoever. I actually appreciate it because it gave me a reason, a good reason, to redo this video and to revisit this in a way I should have probably done to begin with anyway. So, okay, one more thing really quickly before I let you go, I forgot to do. Okay, so some of you may wonder also why I had the middle cranked all the way up on this Marshall to test it. And I'll show you why. Because on a lot of amplifiers, including Marshalls, when you crank the amp, you get to a point where you get into distortion, and you can see the wave clipping up here at the top, and you can see all this notch distortion in the middle. That's the classic, really angry Marshall thing right there. That's what it looks like when it's angry, okay? Now, check this out, though. Here's angry Marshall time right here. There's really angry Marshall. Now watch me turn down the middle, the mids. I can actually clean up the amp completely by just turning, almost completely, by turning down just the mids. Look at how much gain is lost, how much clipping and distortion is lost just by turning mids down. And look at this. Watch the treble. Look at this. You see all this really angry looking notch here, and all this stuff, this squared off notch down here, this anger, all this, that's what it looks like. It just looks angry, doesn't it? You can get rid of all that anger just by turning down the mids and the treble. Look, I cleaned the amp up entirely just turning down mids and treble. Look, I mean, that's actually just and here's me cranking up on the bass. Ooh, there's a problem with the bass control. Look at that. Some kind of issue with the bass control. So when I turn up the bass control, it's doing this. So I've either got a bad control or I've got a bad cap right there. I did not notice before. Maybe I had the, Oh, I know why it is, because there's not enough of the other, if you turn up just bass on this amp, yeah, it's going to distort like that. It's just too much. It goes into that right there. That's like that's an oscillation right there. See what that looks like? So I've got middle and treble all the way down, and the bass, I know it's hard to tell because there's no knob, but I'm going to turn the bass up. Right now it's all the way down also. And look at the wave. So all three are all the way down. But watch this. I'm going to turn up just the bass. And it goes into this oscillation. It's just too much bass that the amp, it just can't handle putting all bass through it like that. So you get this oscillation effect. That's what it is. So, but if I turn up the treble and the mids to about halfway or so, let's back off the output as well, just a little bit, and I can turn up the bass to my heart's desire, and there's no problem. So it's actually just it's more of a feature of the tone stack than anything on this amp. But anyway, so that's what I wanted to show you guys. I just wanted to show you a little bit more about the things that I had left out before. So hopefully somebody gets something out of this.